Gianni Infantino once gave a very strange explanation for why he became FIFA president. Not strange because it was confusing, strange because it was almost too honest. He said, "If I ever want to touch the World Cup, I need to become FIFA president because I can never touch it as a player." The line is kind of funny at first. It sounds like a joke from a man who knows his limits. He wasn't going to lift the trophy in a shirt, so he'd lift it in a suit. But the more you sit with it, the more it starts to actually explain him. Because Infantino didn't come into football as a great player. He didn't come in with medals or old dressing room stories or the natural authority of someone who'd been there, in the middle of it. He came in through the side door. Law, administration, languages, meetings, contracts, committees, the parts of football most fans never see and most players never want to think about. And in a way, that's the whole story. A man who couldn't possess the game on the pitch found another way to possess it. He learned the backstage game. He learned how power works when nobody's watching. He learned how to speak to every room in its own language. And then when FIFA collapsed into scandal, he stepped into the opening and made himself the face of the whole thing. So the question isn't just whether Infantino loves football. By most accounts, he really does. The question is what kind of love this is. Is it service or is it possession? Is he growing the game or is he growing himself inside the game? And what does his need to be seen, honoured and central tell you about the way he runs football? Infantino's background matters because he uses it. He comes from Switzerland, from a modest immigrant family, and he grew up in a multilingual, multicultural world. That's not just biography for him, it's part of the way he presents himself. He's the outsider who understands everyone, the man from the borderlands, the lawyer who can move between cultures, between languages, between power blocks. He grew up close enough to football to want it, but not close enough to be transformed by playing it at the highest level. His cousin once described the idea very simply. If Gianni wasn't good enough to be a footballer, he wanted to be a lawyer of the footballer. Always the idea was something to do with football. This is important because it gives his ambition a different shape. Some football people want to coach, some want to own clubs, some want to be pundits. Infantino wanted the system. The room where the draw is made, the contract is signed, the host is chosen, the money is moved, the rules are written. Even his little stories about his youth work tend to work this way. He has told a story about winning an election to take over an Italian football club with what he called the killer argument, that his mother would wash the team shirts for free. It's a charming story, and he knows it's charming. It gives you humility, family, service, football, all in one neat package. But it also shows the basic power move. He knows how to make administration sound like love. He knows how to turn a committee room into a football story. And that's a very powerful skill in FIFA, because FIFA is mostly committee rooms pretending to be the people's game. Before he became FIFA president, Infantino was not a global star. He was a UEFA administrator, a lawyer bureaucrat, the man many fans knew only from televised draws if they knew him at all. Michel Platini was the football face, Sepp Blatter was the FIFA machine, Infantino was the efficient man behind the desk. And then, the king and queen, as one journalist put it, were suddenly out of the game. Blatter fell, Platini fell. FIFA was in what Infantino himself called its darkest hour, and the man who'd spent his whole life mastering the backstage suddenly was on the main stage. Infantino did not rise because the football world had spent years demanding Gianni Infantino. He rose because of a vacuum. Blatter's FIFA had been hit by scandal. Platini, Infantino's old patron and the person many expected to move into the top job, was taken out of the race. Infantino entered as a kind of emergency candidate, a stopgap, a clean lawyer from UEFA who could speak reform at the exact moment FIFA needed to hear it. There are darker claims around that moment. Platini has alleged that Infantino helped orchestrate a false accusation campaign to destroy him and clear the path. This is disputed, and it shouldn't be treated as settled fact. But even without accepting that version, the outcome is clear. The fall of others made the space. Infantino understood the space, and then he converted the space into permanent power. He ran as a reformer. Transparency, democracy, term limits, respect, a new FIFA. This was the language the moment demanded. FIFA had to look washed clean, and Infantino was almost perfectly built for that role. He wasn't an old football strongman. He didn't sound like a backroom baron. He sounded modern, legal, multilingual, competent. He promised to restore the image of FIFA, and he promised that everyone would applaud. And that's such an Infantino idea. Reform is not only about fixing the thing, reform is about the applause that comes after. And to be fair, FIFA did change under him. Money went out to more member associations. The World Cup expanded to 48 teams. The Club World Cup became a much bigger project. Women's football became part of the sales pitch. And at least in one real case, FIFA pressure helped secure a concrete women's access outcome in Iran. So if you're one of the smaller football nations, it's not hard to see why Infantino's message lands. He says the money of FIFA is your money. He says the game belongs everywhere. He says the old world kept too much for itself, and he is here to open the gates. But there's one caveat with that. In Infantino's world, the gates open in a very specific direction. They open towards him. The strangest thing by far about Infantino's reform story is that some of it was real and some of it was hollowed out almost as soon as it mattered. He came in on transparency and ethics, but under his presidency, independent ethics and governance bodies were weakened. The Code of Ethics was changed in 2018 in a way that very notably removed the word corruption and introduced a statute of limitations. For an organization trying to prove it had learnt from corruption scandals, that was a very loud silence. Investigations around Infantino have also tended to end without charges. Questions about private jets, expenses, Panama paper material, old UEFA television contracts, and undisclosed meetings with the Swiss Attorney General probing FIFA have mostly been closed. Infantino frames that as vindication. His critics see something else. They see a system where oversight has been softened, where the watchdogs no longer have the same teeth, and where clean outcomes can become part of the performance. The Attorney General meetings are especially damaging in terms of image. Infantino had undisclosed meetings with the Swiss official investigating FIFA. That official later resigned after being found out to have lied about them. Infantino wasn't convicted of a crime from that, but as a story about reform, it's terrible. The president, who promised clean governance, is meeting the prosecutor in secret and then asking people to see closure as proof. This is where his need to be central starts to matter, because if you truly believe that you alone are the reform, then scrutiny can feel like an attack on the mission. Journalists become enemies, critics become hypocrites, questions become insults, and Infantino often responds that way. In Qatar, before the 2022 World Cup, he gave one of the most famous speeches of his presidency. To this day, the clip still does the rounds on social media. He said he felt Qatari, Arab, African, gay, disabled, and like a migrant worker. It was meant as empathy, or maybe as a counterattack against Western criticism, but it landed for many people as something else. A man with one of the most powerful jobs in sport and a multi-million-dollar salary, borrowing identities in order to place himself at the center of other people's suffering. And that's the pattern. Infantino often takes criticism of FIFA or criticism of a host and turns it into a story about himself. His childhood, his difference, his outsider status, his moral understanding. The subject shifts. The room has to look at him. I know we're currently in the middle of a World Cup, but if you want one object that explains the Infantino era, it might not be the World Cup. It might be the Club World Cup trophy. Because his name was engraved on it, along with a laudatory inscription. For a football administrator, that's an extraordinary thing. Players get names on trophies. Clubs get names on trophies. The whole point of an administrator, at least in theory, is that he protects the stage and then gets out of the way. Alexander Seferin, the UEFA president, once made the point very plainly. No football administrator, no matter how big the ego, should think administrators are the stars of the game, because they aren't. Infantino seems to know that rule very clearly, he just doesn't always live by it. The Club World Cup is a perfect example. Publicly, it's sold as an expansion opportunity. Global football, clubs from everywhere meeting on a bigger stage. And there's a real argument there. More teams can mean more access, more money can mean more development. Some federations and smaller markets see Infantino as the man who finally made FIFA's wealth travel outwards. But expansion also does something very useful for a FIFA president. It creates revenue, it creates payouts, it creates loyalty. It turns the president into the distributor of football's future. You don't just vote for an administrator, you vote for the man who can bring your federation money, your region slots, your country visibility, your officials a place in the room. That is why Infantino's growth agenda is so powerful. It sounds like a democracy, it looks like a democracy, and in some ways it is. But it's also patronage. It binds the football world to him through the promise of more. More teams, more tournaments, more money, more places at the table, more reasons not to challenge the man handing it out. And then there's the personal side. The transparency reforms passed on the day he was elected now help to show that his pay has risen dramatically to roughly $5 to $6 million. Again, that doesn't mean every decision he makes is corrupt, but it clashes with Infantino's performance. The humble son of immigrants, the servant of the game, the man of the people, is also the man whose compensation has multiplied, whose name appears on a trophy, and whose office increasingly sits near presidents, princes, and billionaires. The image says service, but the behavior often says status. Power likes power. Infantino has a very clear instinct for political gravity. He moves towards power. In Russia, after the 2018 World Cup, he spoke warmly about the new image of Russia that the tournament had created. In the Gulf, he built close ties through Qatar and beyond, and his life became more connected to Doha. He also acquired exceptional Lebanese citizenship through a rare presidential dispensation and married a Lebanese national, deepening those regional ties. With Saudi Arabia, FIFA's path towards the 2034 World Cup became one of the clearest examples of an outcome that looked, to critics, arranged before it was debated. But his relationship with Donald Trump may be the most revealing because it's so visible. FIFA embedded office space inside Trump Tower. The World Cup and the Club World Cup trophies were placed in Trump's office. Infantino praised what Trump was doing and encouraged business leaders to invest in FIFA and football. He created a FIFA Peace Prize and gave it to Trump shortly after Trump had complained about being overlooked for the Nobel Peace Prize. That last detail almost sounds too on the nose. A football president creates a Peace Prize and then gives it to the most powerful man in the room at the exact moment that that man wants a prize, but it fits into a pattern. Infantino doesn't only seek power, he flatters power, mirrors power, attaches FIFA to power. If you've been following the latest, you'll know that there was also the reported case of a player's, Flo Balogun of the US men's team, red card suspension being reversed after a personal phone call from Trump. If that account is right, it shows the danger of turning institutions into relationships. Rules become flexible, the process becomes personal, football becomes a place where the right call to the right man can change an outcome. This is where Infantino's psychology and FIFA's structure meet. FIFA is a global body made of national associations. Its president has to build coalitions. He also has to deal with governments. He has to sell tournaments to states rich enough to stage them. Some of this is just the job. But Infantino seems to take the job and make it bigger around himself. He doesn't just meet leaders, he collects honors. He doesn't just bring trophies to America, the trophies end up in Trump's office. He doesn't just promote a tournament, he announces that football will conquer America and says it officially, like a world leader declaring a campaign. He speaks in a football language, but it's also a conquest language, and Infantino likes that scale. Power in FIFA doesn't usually look like a dramatic coup, it looks like silence. Infantino was re-elected unopposed in 2019. He was re-elected again by acclamation in 2023. He's now seeking a fourth mandate that could take him to 2031, while the next person would still be capped at 3 terms. The man who arrived with the term limit reform has found a way to stretch his own clock. That tells you a lot about how control works. It doesn't always need an open fight. Sometimes it works by making a fight pointless. The money is flowing, the tournaments are expanding, the small federations feel seen, the big states feel courted. The critics inside the system look around and realize almost nobody wants to be the first to say something. A former UEFA colleague said they no longer recognized the Gianni they saw and heard, and wondered whether this was the real him or whether years in the job had done it to him. That's probably the most human version of the question. Maybe the office revealed him, maybe it changed him, maybe those aren't really separate things. Because the role gives him exactly what the player in him never had. It gives him the trophy. It gives him the stage, it gives him the applause. It gives him the presidents waiting, congresses pausing, cameras turning, federations thanking him, critics forced to react to him. It gives him the feeling that the game is not happening to him anymore, but rather he is the game. And that's why the World Cup line matters so much. He wanted to touch the trophy, but once you become the person who can touch it, you don't just touch metal, you touch the whole system around it. Hosts, rules, money, access, punishment, reward, memory. You get to decide what the future of football looks like, and then you get to stand in the photograph when it's announced. Infantino's defenders can point to real things. More money, more teams, more countries pulled towards the centre of the sport. A genuine, almost undimmed enthusiasm for football. Stories of private kindness, stories of personal attention, stories that complicate the easy cartoon of a cynical operator. But the pattern is still hard to miss. Reform becomes his language, expansion becomes his engine, crisis becomes his opportunity, powerful men become his partners, and the institution that was supposed to be cleaned up becomes, in many ways, more centered on one man than ever. So maybe Infantino did become FIFA president just to touch the World Cup. The problem is that he didn't stop at touching it. He seems to want football itself to feel like something he can hold,